The house smelled like lavender and honey. I'd spent hours perfecting the frosting. Each delicate swirl on the anniversary cake piped with the same care I used to give my wedding clients, back when Blossom Haven was still mine. The cake sat proudly on the dessert table, a soft peach centerpiece beneath a glittering 40 years topper. The dining room buzzed with warmth. Neighbors, old friends, relatives I hadn't seen since high school. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loud. My mother's prized china pulled from the cabinet once, a decade gleamed under the chandelier. I took my seat, still brushing powdered sugar from my hands. Mom sat across from me in her silk blouse. Hair curled just right. She lifted her wine glass and tapped it with a spoon. The room fell quiet. To 40 years of love, she said, and the grace to know when to let things go. At first, I thought it was poetic until she turned to me. "You're a burden, Lillian," she said. "We want to live without you." My breath caught. I thought I'd misheard her, but the words were still echoing, hanging in the air like smoke. I turned to Dad. He didn't flinch, just took another sip of wine. Chairs creaked. Forks paused midair. Susan from next door lowered her gaze. No one spoke, not even my sister. I smiled. I don't know why. Reflex? Maybe. I lifted my glass, sipped, and let the burn settle behind my ribs. Then I stood smoothing the napkin across my lap and walked away. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Upstairs. I pulled my suitcase from the closet, packed slowly essentials, only some clothes, my laptop, 3 framed photos from my nightstand. The house was hushed as I slipped out the side door and into the night. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was done pretending I was wanted. By morning, I was 10 miles away in a motel room with a flickering hallway light and a stiff pillow that smelled like bleach. I lay on top of the covers, watching the shadows shift on the ceiling, and let myself feel everything I hadn't let show at the table. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. Tomorrow, I'd begin to understand just how much they depended on the person they had so easily cast aside. I woke before the sun, stiff from the motel mattress, and still dressed in the same blouse from dinner. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, a kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing. I sat up slowly, legs dangling over the edge of the bed, and stared at the carpet. I'd known this day was coming. I just hadn't expected it to arrive so loudly in front of a room full of people 5 years ago. I'd walked away from something I loved. Blossom Haven was never a booming business, but it was mine. Every petal, every invoice, every late-night wedding arrangement. My hands built it. When the call came, Mom's voice had trembled, medical bills, repairs, late mortgage notices piling up. She said they were drowning. I didn't hesitate. I sold the shop for $132,000. I didn't even try to negotiate. Just handed the keys to a young couple who wanted to add a modern twist to my rustic displays. Then I moved back into my childhood bedroom, promising myself it was temporary, but temporary stretched into years. I got a job at a nursery, half the pay. None of the pride, but it kept the money flowing. And the money never stopped flowing every month. And not once did they sit me down and say, "We see what you're doing. Thank you." Instead, they told me I was a burden. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop. I needed to see the numbers. Needed to feel them stacked in rows and columns. Unarguable. I scrolled through the auto payments. My account had been their lifeline, and I hadn't even realized how deeply. My fingers hovered over the cancellation tabs. Not yet, but soon. I closed the screen, leaned back in the creaking motel chair, and stared at the ceiling. They said they wanted to live without me. Maybe it was time to show them what that actually looked like. I opened the spreadsheet I'd started keeping 2 years ago, not out of bitterness, but to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Utilities consistent $300 a month, give or take. Water usually $120. The internet and streaming bundles $83. The mortgage $1,000 even. Property taxes every quarter. Insurance twice a year. Groceries were harder to track. I'd swipe my card whenever the fridge looked empty or when Mom added things to the list and left it on the counter like an expectation. Repairs came in waves, plumbing leaks, and aging HVAC replacing the back steps. I tallied up the last 12 months alone over $22,000, quietly, automatically withdrawn from the life I had put on pause. I used to think it was love or maybe obligation, but sitting in this cheap motel chair with my laptop humming and my back aching, it looked like something else. I remembered the way Mom would introduce me at church. This is Lillian, our oldest. She's staying with us for a bit while she figures things out. I remembered the way Dad never asked about work, how he'd glance up from his lawnmower repairs in the garage when I came home, but never said much beyond. Dinner's on the stove. And Emma, my sister, once said during breakfast, "It's not like you have a real job anyway." I had laughed it off, but I didn't forget. It hadn't started this way. The first few months back in that house, there were signs of appreciation. Mom made me tea some nights. Dad fixed my old car. But eventually they stopped noticing what I gave and only saw me as someone who stayed. And I stayed longer than I should have. I kept telling myself I was preserving something, the house, their dignity, our family. But all I'd really done was exchange my independence for their comfort. I closed the spreadsheet, then reopened it. My cursor hovered over the autopay settings tab again. Maybe the only way to reclaim my future was to stop financing theirs. Clara opened the door before I even knocked. Her face was soft with concern, her voice low, and she said, "Come in, honey." As if any louder might make me break. Their living room hadn't changed since the last time I was here. Warm wood floors, mismatched throw pillows, a crooked painting from a craft fair that Clara swore was charm, not a flaw. It felt lived in real, the kind of space where you didn't have to be anyone but tired and honest. James appeared from the kitchen with a mug of tea already in hand, the way people do when they know you well enough not to ask first. I sank into the couch and didn't speak for a long time. When I finally did, I told them everything. Not just at the dinner, though I did tell them that every word but the years leading up to it. The shop I gave up, the payments I made, the slow disappearance of gratitude, the weight of always being needed, never wanted. Clara didn't interrupt. She just placed a hand on my arm and squeezed. James sat across from me, legs crossed, brow furrowed, silent until I finished. Then he said, "You ever hear about what happened with Nathan?" Nathan Brooks had been an acquaintance from our early business days. Owned a lawn care company and took care of his family for nearly a decade. Paid for everything. Then one day his daughter told him he was controlling. Said he was in the way. So he walked, turned off every financial tap. Within 2 months, the house was repossessed, the car gone. The daughter living in a one-bedroom across town. He didn't do it to punish her. James said he just stopped letting her write checks with someone else's account. I stared into my tea, the steam fading. That night, alone in their guest room, I opened my laptop again. My fingers didn't tremble this time. Electricity cancel, water cancel, internet cancel, streaming insurance, online grocery account. The digital umbilical cord severed thread by thread. Each click was a quiet goodbye, a sentence they never let me say aloud. I didn't feel angry, just clear. They said they wanted to live without me. Now they could. I closed the lid, exhaled slowly, and finally lay back in a bed that wasn't mine, but for the first time in years didn't feel like it cost me everything to stay in. I woke to sunlight slanting through the guest room blinds and the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen. For a moment, I let myself pretend it was a regular morning one where I hadn't been called a burden, hadn't walked out, hadn't spent the night untangling years of obligation with a few careful keystrokes. Then I reached for my phone. 17 missed calls, all from Mom. 2 voicemails, 1 text. "Call me now. Call." I stared at the screen without opening a single one. 10 minutes later, it rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. I answered without speaking. "What the hell did you do?" Emma's voice was sharp, frantic. "The internet's down. I have client submissions due today. The power's flickering. Mom's freaking out." I kept my voice calm. I stopped paying. There was a pause. Then she scoffed. "What is wrong with you? You can't just pull the plug on everything without warning. I wasn't warned when I was called a burden. I said that was she faltered. That was just Mom. She was emotional. You know how she gets in Dad. Silence. I waited. You're being dramatic, she said finally. Look, just flip everything back on. Okay, we'll talk later. No. Another pause. This one colder. Emma snapped. This is exactly why no one wants to deal with you. You always make everything about yourself. I didn't answer. I just ended the call. Clara walked in a few minutes later, holding a plate of toast and a soft look I didn't deserve, but appreciated anyway. I didn't tell her what Emma said. I didn't need to. The phone was still buzzing on the nightstand, a steady reminder of the chaos I'd left behind. By noon, the calls had slowed, but the silence felt heavier. No apology came, not from Mom, not from Dad, just panic and blame like I'd stolen something instead of simply stepping away. The weight in my chest wasn't anger. It was recognition. That may be all this time. I hadn't been loved for who I was, but for what I provided. Later that afternoon, the messages changed tone. One from Mom read, "The water's off. I don't know what's happening. Please call me." Still no mention of what was said at dinner. No acknowledgement, just logistics crisis expectation. I powered the phone off. That evening, James grilled vegetables in the backyard while Clara poured us glasses of sweet tea. The air was still warm, the light just starting to shift. I sat between them quiet. My hands wrapped around the glass, watching the smoke rise from the grill. They didn't ask me for anything. They didn't pretend to understand everything. They just let me exist. It was the first time in years I felt like I could, and tomorrow. I knew the unraveling would begin. It didn't take long for word to spread. Charleston was big enough to disappear in, but the neighborhood wasn't. Clara heard from a coworker who'd heard from her cousin that the Hayes family was behind on their mortgage. Susan from 2 doors down had apparently stopped by with store-bought muffins and left with a tight-lipped story about the utilities being out for 3 days straight. And Emma, my sister, who once posted about freedom and freelancing, was now working night shifts at a 24-hour supermarket off River Road. Someone Clara knew had seen her shelving canned goods in the fluorescent half-light. She hadn't looked up. I didn't feel vindicated, just tired. Michael texted me that morning asking if I was okay. I told him I was mostly. He replied with a simple "proud of you." That was enough, late that afternoon. There was a knock on Clara's door. I knew who it was before she opened it. Mom stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like it might run away. She looked smaller somehow. Not older, just collapsed inward. "Can we talk?" she asked. Clara glanced at me, and I gave her a slight nod. Mom sat stiff on the edge of the guest room couch. I didn't move from the armchair. She started with small things. The fridge, the heating, the plants, dying without the humidifier I used to refill. Then her voice cracked. "Lillian, sweetheart, we're trying, but it's too much." I let her speak. I waited. Finally. I said, "You told me you wanted to live without me." She flinched. "I didn't mean, but you said it. And you said it in front of people who still haven't reached out to ask if I'm okay." Tears welled in her eyes. "We need help." I nodded slowly. "Then it's time Emma and Dad figure out how to help you. I did my part for 5 years." She didn't argue. She just sat for a moment longer, then stood knotted tightly and walked out. I watched the door close and felt something settle in me. Not revenge, just release. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about choosing myself. A week passed before I heard from them again. Not directly from my father, of course. He never called, never had, not even when I first moved out at 19. But he sent a message through Mom, scribbled in his square handwriting on the back of a gardening flyer she left in Clara's mailbox. Think about what family means. I read it twice, 3 times, then folded it neatly and tucked it into the bottom of my tote bag without a word. Later that day, Mom called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was softer this time. Practiced, measured. "We just wanted space. Lillian, not to lose you that night." We were overwhelmed. Your father was tired. I didn't mean for it to come out that way, but it had come out that way. And not one person at that table had stopped it. Not even her. I called her back that evening. She answered on the second ring. You said you wanted to live without me, I said quietly. We were emotional, she insisted. We thought maybe it was time you found your own way. It wasn't about not appreciating you, but that's exactly what it was about. I said you didn't want to feel dependent on me, so you decided to erase what I'd done instead. She was quiet for a long time. We miss you, she said finally. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Then you should have said something different at the dinner table. I didn't wait for a response. I hung up and turned off my phone again. I had no interest in dragging myself back into a version of home where I was only valuable when invisible. Let them sit in the space they'd asked for. I wasn't going to rescue anyone from a silence they created. 3 months passed in quiet, steady separation. I didn't call. I didn't ask for updates, but news like weeds finds a way to grow. Susan from across the street sent me a photo one morning. No caption, just an image of the old house with a crooked for sale sign stuck in the patchy front lawn. The grass had yellowed, the shutters were peeling, and the flower beds I once tended had been swallowed by weeds. I stared at the picture for a long time. Not with satisfaction, not even sadness, just distance, like looking at a past life you no longer recognize as your own. They sold it 2 weeks later. Clara told me the details in a whisper, as if speaking louder might make it feel real. The buyers were a couple from out of state. The price was low, far lower than it should have been, but the mortgage had fallen too far behind to wait for a better offer. Mom, Dad, and Emma moved into a rental on the far edge of the city, a one-bedroom apartment above a consignment store. No backyard, no garage, no garden. I didn't visit, not out of spite. I just had no business going back. The house I grew up in had stopped being mine long before I walked out the side door that night. I was just the one who paid to keep it standing. Now someone else would be walking through those rooms, repainting the walls, tearing out the old carpet. I hoped they wouldn't find the ledger of sacrifice buried beneath the foundation. Because that story, my story, had finally ended, and I wasn't going to write another chapter in a house that had never truly made room for the woman I became. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and unmarked except for my name in neat handwriting I hadn't seen in a while. Emma. I let it sit on the counter for hours. I made tea, rearranged the books on the shelf, wiped down a table that wasn't dusty. Still it waited. Still, I opened it. It was 2 pages, carefully written. Carefully vague. She said she was sorry. Said things had gotten out of hand, that she'd been stressed, overwhelmed. She mentioned the house sale. The move, how difficult it had all been. There was a line about missing the way things used to be and a hope that maybe one day we could talk. But nowhere in those pages was the word grateful. Nowhere was the sentence, you didn't deserve that. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with other things I no longer needed but couldn't quite throw away. I didn't write back by then. I was in my own space, a modest condo in Westfield with a narrow balcony and just enough room for peace. I worked part-time for a floral studio downtown, helping design wedding arrangements, teaching bouquet workshops to brides and kids and people who just liked color. I was building something again. Not a business, not a legacy, just a quiet life that didn't require anyone else's permission to feel like mine. The phone rang sometimes. Unknown numbers, voicemails that started with long pauses. I didn't pick up. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't opening a door that had only ever swung one way. And when I turned off the lamp each night, I did so without worrying who was still waiting in the dark. The walls of my condo are slowly filling with color flower sketches I've drawn on slow afternoons. Some framed, some taped with no particular plan. Peonies, lilies, daisies in motion. Not for sale, not for display. Just for me. Each morning I step onto the small balcony with my watering can. The planters are full now. Mint rosemary wildflowers, a stubborn ivy I nearly gave up on. The scent rises with the heat, soft and green. Sometimes I catch myself humming. My bank account isn't full, but it's mine. Every paycheck comes from work I choose, and every bill is one I signed up for. No one's name rides beside mine anymore. I no longer wake up checking for overdue notices. I no longer brace for the weight of someone else's silence. One evening, as the sky turned lavender, I stood barefoot on the balcony. Jose draped over my arm. Mist catching the last bit of light, and I whispered it aloud just once, just for me. I was never the burden. I was the builder. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. Inside, my phone rested on the table. No buzzing, no pleading, just stillness. And I let it stay that way, turning back to the vines curling toward the railing roots, clinging tight, growing where they were finally allowed to stay. Lillian learns that her worth isn't defined by others' demands or ingratitude. Sacrificing her dreams and independence to support her family, she endured years of unacknowledged contributions only to be called a burden. By stepping away and reclaiming her autonomy, she discovers the strength to prioritize herself without guilt. The unraveling of her family's reliance on her reveals their failure to value her beyond what she provided. Lillian's journey teaches her that true self-worth comes from building a life aligned with her own desires, not from carrying the weight of others' expectations.
The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing architectural plans for the new children's wing at Metropolitan Hospital. My father's voice carried that familiar tone of controlled disappointment that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Samantha, we need to discuss Harrison's graduation party," he said without preamble. My younger brother Harrison was graduating from Stanford with his MBA, a milestone that had consumed my family's attention for months. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening at the prestigious Hillcrest Club, with 200 guests expected to celebrate Harrison's achievement. "What about it, Dad?" "Well, your mother and I have been discussing the guest list, and we think it might be better if you didn't attend." I set down my pen and leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the city skyline 30 floors below. "I see. And why is that?" "It's nothing personal, Samantha. It's just that this is a very important event for Harrison's career. The guest list includes partners from major consulting firms, executives from Fortune 500 companies, influential alumni from Stanford's business school." "Okay. The thing is," he continued, clearly uncomfortable but determined to push forward, "your current situation might not fit with the tone we're trying to set." "My current situation." That was my family's diplomatic way of referring to what they perceived as my complete lack of professional success. For the past 4 years, I'd been deliberately vague about my work, telling them only that I was involved in various projects and doing some freelance consulting. "You think I'll lower the tone?" I asked. "It's not that we're ashamed of you," he said quickly. "It's just that Harrison has worked so hard to position himself for success, and this party is really about networking and making the right impressions. And you don't think I make the right impression?" "Samantha, be realistic. You're 32 years old, you don't have a traditional career, you live in that tiny apartment, you drive a car that's older than some of the graduates. These are successful people who've built substantial lives. They won't understand your lifestyle choices." I almost laughed. My tiny apartment was actually a penthouse I'd bought in cash 3 years ago. I kept it modest because I preferred simplicity. My old car was a perfectly maintained vehicle that I drove because I cared more about reliability than status symbols. "So you want me to skip my own brother's graduation party?" "We want what's best for Harrison's future," my father said firmly. "And honestly, we think you'd be more comfortable staying home anyway. These corporate networking events can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to that environment." "I understand, Dad. I'll stay home." "Really? You're not going to argue about it?" "No, I think you're probably right. I wouldn't want to make Harrison uncomfortable." "Thank you, Samantha. I knew you'd be mature about this. We'll take lots of pictures to show you later." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a few minutes, processing the conversation. My own family had uninvited me from my brother's graduation party because they thought I was too unsuccessful to be seen in public with them. My assistant Jennifer knocked on my door. "The hospital committee is here for the 4 o'clock meeting about the children's wing donation." "Send them in," I said, pushing aside my family drama to focus on more important matters. The meeting went well. The hospital's development team was grateful for the $15 million donation I was making through my foundation to build the new pediatric cancer treatment center. We reviewed the architectural plans, discussed the timeline, and finalized the details for the groundbreaking ceremony. Ms. Thompson, the hospital CEO said as the meeting concluded, "I can't express how much this donation means to our patients and their families. This new wing will save countless lives." "That's what matters," I replied. "Sometimes the most important investments are the ones that don't generate financial returns." Friday evening, I received a call from my mother. "Samantha, honey, I just wanted to check that you're okay with missing the party tomorrow." "I'm fine, Mom. I have plenty to keep me busy. Your father mentioned you took it very well. To be honest, I was worried you might be upset." "Why would I be upset?" "Well, it's just that. I know you don't have much of a social life, and I thought you might have been looking forward to getting out and meeting people." My social life actually consisted of charity galas, board meetings, and business dinners with some of the most influential people in the country. But my mother didn't need to know that. "I'll be fine, Mom. I have a new show to binge watch anyway." "That's good, dear. You know, maybe this will motivate you to work on building a more substantial life. Harrison's success could be inspiring for you." "Maybe so. I love you, honey. Even if you're not as ambitious as your brother, you're still our daughter." Saturday arrived and I spent the morning at my foundation's office, reviewing grant applications and discussing upcoming projects with my program directors. The Samantha Thompson Foundation had quietly become one of the largest private charitable organizations in the state, funding everything from educational scholarships to medical research to environmental conservation. In the afternoon, I settled in at home with takeout and Netflix as promised. I was halfway through a documentary series when my phone started ringing. The first call was from my mother, her voice panicked. "Samantha, where are you?" "Home watching Netflix. Remember? You uninvited me. We need you to come to the party. Right now." "Why? What happened?" "Just come. Please. I'll explain when you get here." The second call came 5 minutes later from Harrison himself. "Sam, I need you at the Hillcrest Club immediately." "Harrison, Dad specifically told me not to come because I'd lower the tone." "Forget what Dad said. I need my sister here. Please." The third call was from my father, his voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Samantha, there's been a misunderstanding. You need to come to the party." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Please come. Wear something nice. This is important." Intrigued despite myself, I changed into a simple black dress and drove to the Hillcrest Club. The valet took my keys with the same professional courtesy he'd shown the BMWs and Mercedes that filled the parking lot. Inside, the party was in full swing. The elegant ballroom was filled with well-dressed professionals holding champagne glasses and engaging in animated conversations. I spotted Harrison near the bar, looking unusually stressed for someone celebrating his graduation. "Sam," he called out when he saw me rushing over. "Thank God you're here." "Harrison, what's going on? Why the emergency summons?" "There's someone here who's been asking for you." "Asking for me? Who?" "Dean Morrison from Stanford. He arrived about an hour ago and immediately started asking where Samantha Thompson was. When we told him you weren't coming, he seemed surprised." "Dean Morrison. I knew him well from our various conversations about the university's expansion plans and research initiatives. He was a brilliant academic administrator and someone I genuinely respected." "Where is he now?" "Over by the windows talking to Dad." "Sam, why would the dean of Stanford Business School be looking for you specifically?" "I have no idea," I lied. As we walked across the ballroom, I could see my father engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly uncomfortable conversation with Dean Morrison. My mother stood nearby, looking confused and worried. "Ah, there she is," Dean Morrison exclaimed when he spotted me. "Samantha Thompson. I was beginning to think you weren't coming to your own brother's celebration." "Dean Morrison," I said, shaking his hand warmly. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here." "I wouldn't miss the chance to meet Harrison's family," he replied. "Especially his sister." My father looked puzzled. "You two know each other?" "Know each other?" Dean Morrison laughed. "Samantha is one of Stanford's most valued supporters. I was hoping to discuss the new research center with her this evening." The conversation around us gradually quieted as people began to notice that the dean was speaking very familiarly with the person who had been deemed too unsuccessful to attend the party. "Research center?" my mother asked weakly. "The Thompson Center for Innovation in Sustainable Technology," Dean Morrison explained enthusiastically. Samantha's foundation is funding a $40 million research facility that will be the premier center for clean energy research on the West Coast. The silence that followed was profound. $40 million? Harrison whispered. It's actually a 5-year commitment, I clarified. $8 million per year for operations, plus the initial construction funding. Dean Morrison nodded approvingly. It's one of the largest private donations in the university's history. The groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. My father's face had gone completely pale. Samantha has a foundation? The Samantha Thompson Foundation, Dean Morrison said, clearly surprised by the question. It's one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the state. Samantha, surely your family knows about your charitable work. We've never really discussed it in detail, I said diplomatically. Well, Dean Morrison continued, oblivious to the family tension, perhaps this is a good time to share some exciting news. Samantha, the board approved your proposal for the scholarship program. We'll be able to offer full rides to 50 students per year from underserved communities. That's wonderful news, I said, genuinely pleased. Scholarship program? My mother managed to ask. The Thompson Scholars Program, Dean Morrison explained. Samantha is funding full scholarships for students who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford a Stanford education. It's a game changer for educational equity. By now, a significant portion of the party guests had stopped their own conversations to listen to ours. I could see business executives and alumni straining to hear what the dean was saying. Dean Morrison, my father said slowly, I think there might be some confusion. Samantha doesn't. That is, she's not really in a position to make donations of that magnitude. Dean Morrison looked genuinely confused. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Samantha is one of our most generous donors. The Thompson Foundation has contributed over $60 million to various Stanford initiatives over the past 3 years. $60 million, Harrison repeated, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Actually, I said, it's closer to $75 million when you include the medical school grants and the undergraduate scholarship endowment. The party had essentially stopped at this point, with most guests openly listening to our conversation. Samantha, my mother said faintly, where did you get $75 million? Before I could answer, another voice joined the conversation. Good evening, Samantha. I turned to see Margaret Crawford, the CEO of Crawford Industries, approaching our group. I'd known Margaret for several years through various business dealings and charitable boards. Margaret, I said, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm a Stanford alumna, she explained. I never miss a chance to support the business school. Though I have to say, I'm surprised to find you here as a family member rather than a fellow donor. Fellow donor? My father asked. Samantha sits on the board of our corporate foundation, Margaret explained. She's been instrumental in our education and healthcare initiatives. Her strategic thinking has helped us deploy our charitable giving much more effectively. He turned to me. Speaking of which, I wanted to thank you for the introduction to the Children's Hospital. Your recommendation was spot on, and our pediatric care partnership is exceeding all expectations. I'm glad it's working out, I said. Children's Hospital? My mother asked. Metropolitan Children's Hospital, Margaret clarified. Samantha connected us with their development team. We're funding a new research lab for childhood cancer treatment. Dean Morrison nodded. That's typical of Samantha's approach. She doesn't just write checks, she creates strategic partnerships that maximize impact. Strategic partnerships, my father repeated numbly. At this point, Dr. Patricia Williams, a Stanford alumna and prominent surgeon, joined our growing circle. Samantha, she said warmly. I was hoping I'd see you here. I wanted to thank you personally for the medical research grant. The early results from the treatment protocol you funded are incredibly promising. That's wonderful news, Patricia. Medical research grant? Harrison asked. The Thompson Foundation is funding several cutting-edge medical research projects, Dr. Williams explained. Samantha has been particularly supportive of our work in pediatric oncology and neurological disorders. She smiled at me. Between your foundation's support and your seat on the hospital's board of directors, you've been instrumental in advancing our research capabilities. Board of directors, my mother whispered. The crowd around us continued to grow as more guests recognized what was happening. I could see business leaders, academics, and philanthropists all nodding respectfully in my direction. Samantha, Dean Morrison said, I hope you don't mind, but I'd love to introduce you to some of our other major donors. I think you'd have a lot in common. That would be nice, I said. As Dean Morrison began introducing me to various guests, I could see my family standing frozen in place, clearly struggling to process what they were learning about me. Samantha Thompson, one distinguished gentleman said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. Charles Patterson, Patterson Industries. I've heard wonderful things about your foundation's work in education. Thank you, Charles. I'm familiar with your company's environmental initiatives. Perhaps we should discuss some collaboration opportunities, he suggested. I think our foundations might be able to partner on some interesting projects. I'd like that. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation after conversation with successful business leaders, academics, and philanthropists. These were exactly the kind of people my father had said would be impressed by success and wouldn't understand my lifestyle choices. The irony was that many of them knew me better than my own family did. Around 9 o'clock, Harrison finally approached me during a brief lull in conversations. Sam, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Are you actually wealthy? Define wealthy. Are you worth more than $1 million? Yes. More than 10 million? Yes. More than. He paused, clearly afraid to ask. More than 50 million? Harrison, my foundation has donated over $100 million in the past 5 years. That doesn't include my personal investments or business interests. He stared at me for a long moment. How? I started investing in technology companies when I was 25. I got lucky with a few early-stage investments that became very successful. Instead of spending the money, I kept reinvesting and eventually started the foundation to give most of it away. But you live in a tiny apartment and drive an old car. I live in a penthouse apartment because I like the simplicity and the view. I drive a reliable car because I care more about functionality than status. Money doesn't have to change how you live. It just gives you more options for how you help others. My father approached us, looking shaken. Samantha, I owe you an enormous apology. Yes, you do. I had no idea. I never realized. Why didn't you tell us about your success? Dad, you told me not to come to Harrison's graduation party because you thought I'd lower the tone. You assumed I was unsuccessful because I don't perform success the way you expect it to be performed. But if you had known, you would have treated me differently. But the question is, why was it okay to treat me poorly when you thought I was unsuccessful? The weight of that question settled over our family conversation. We should have supported you regardless, my mother said quietly. We should have been proud of you whether you were wealthy or struggling. Yes, you should have. Dean Morrison rejoined our group, oblivious to the family tension. Samantha, I wanted to let you know that the research team would love to present their preliminary findings to you next month. Would you be available for a campus visit? I'll check my calendar and get back to you. Excellent. And Harrison, he turned to my brother, congratulations again on your graduation. You should be very proud of your achievements. It's clear that success runs in your family. After Dean Morrison walked away, Harrison looked at me with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Sam, I don't understand how you built all of this without any of us knowing. I built it quietly because I wanted to focus on the work rather than the recognition. The foundation's impact matters more than my family's opinion of my lifestyle choices. But we could have celebrated your successes. We could have been proud of you. You could have been proud of me anyway, I said gently. Success isn't just measured in dollars or recognition. It's measured in the positive impact you have on the world. As the party wound down, my family stayed close to me, clearly wanting to continue processing what they'd learned. Samantha, my father said as we prepared to leave, how do we make this right? You start by understanding that worth isn't determined by wealth or status or the approval of others. You start by treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. We want to do better, my mother said earnestly. Good. Because I'd like my family to actually know who I am, not just what I've accomplished. Can you forgive us? Harrison asked. I can forgive you. But I need you to understand that the person you dismissed as unsuccessful has actually built something meaningful. And more importantly, I need you to commit to supporting people based on their character, not their net worth. The drive home gave me time to reflect on the evening. My family had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions and the difference between success and the performance of success. But more importantly, they'd learned that the most successful people are often the ones who use their success to lift others up, rather than to lift themselves above others. The next morning I woke up to a text from Harrison. "I'm proud to be your brother regardless of how much money you have. But I'm especially proud that you're using your success to help people." I smiled and typed back, "That means more to me than any donation ever could." A week later, my family attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Thompson Center for Innovation in Sustainable Technology at Stanford. They watched as I spoke to the crowd about the importance of investing in solutions to climate change and creating opportunities for the next generation of innovators. After the ceremony, my father pulled me aside. "Samantha, I've been thinking about what you said at Harrison's party. About treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. What about it? I want to volunteer with your foundation. I want to learn how to make a positive impact the way you have." "That would be wonderful, Dad." 6 months later, my father became the volunteer coordinator for our educational scholarship program. He discovered that working directly with students from underserved communities was more fulfilling than any business success he'd ever achieved. My mother started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, reading to young patients undergoing treatment in the wing my foundation had funded. And Harrison? He turned down several high-paying consulting offers to join a nonprofit that provides business training to entrepreneurs in developing countries. Sometimes the best graduation gift isn't money or connections or career opportunities. Sometimes it's the realization that success means using whatever advantages you have to create opportunities for others. And sometimes it takes a university dean showing up at a party to remind a family that the person they thought was lowering the tone was actually raising the bar for everyone around them. The text message arrived on December 15th while I was in the middle of reviewing purchase orders for the Children's Hospital toy drive. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see my mother's name on the screen. "Hi honey. Dad and I have been talking and we think it might be better if you skip Christmas dinner this year. We want it to be really special for your sister's new in-laws and we're worried about, well, your situation might make things awkward. Hope you understand. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back a simple response. "Understood. Have a wonderful Christmas." My situation. That was my family's delicate way of referring to what they perceived as my complete inability to get my life together. At 31, I was unmarried, lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old car, and worked what they considered a dead-end job at a nonprofit organization. What they didn't know was that the nonprofit organization was actually mine. The Rivera Foundation, which I'd started 5 years ago with money from selling a tech startup, had quietly become one of the largest children's charities in the state. But I'd never corrected their assumptions about my work because I was curious to see how they'd treat someone they thought was unsuccessful. The answer, apparently, was to uninvite them from Christmas. I set my phone aside and returned to the purchase orders spread across my desk. The annual Christmas toy drive was our biggest event of the year, and this year we were providing gifts for over 3,000 children from low-income families across the city. My assistant Marcus knocked on my door. The mall Santa called again about the schedule for Saturday. "Send him in," I said. A few minutes later, Tony Martinez entered my office, still wearing his red suit from his shift at Westfield Mall. Tony had been playing Santa for 15 years, but this was his first year working with our foundation's toy distribution program. "Ms. Rivera," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I wanted to talk to you about Saturday's event." "What's on your mind, Tony?" "Well, it's about the kids. They keep asking about you specifically." "What do you mean?" "I mean they know you're the one who bought all their toys. Word gets around in these neighborhoods. The parents have been talking and now the kids all want to meet the toy lady, who made sure every child on our list gets exactly what they asked for." This year's toy drive had been our most ambitious yet. Instead of generic gifts, we'd worked with local schools and community centers to get specific wish lists from each child. Every kid would receive exactly what they'd asked for, from art supplies to bicycles to educational tablets. "Tony, I prefer to stay behind the scenes." "I know, but these kids, they've never had anyone care enough to get them exactly what they wanted for Christmas. They know someone special made this happen and they want to say thank you." I looked out my office window at the December afternoon sky, gray with the promise of snow. "What are you suggesting?" Come to the distribution event on Saturday. Let the kids meet you. Let them see that there are people in the world who care about them. I'll think about it. There's something else, Tony said, shifting in his chair. The news stations have been calling. They want to cover the story of the anonymous donor who spent $500,000 to make sure every child in the city gets their Christmas wish. $500,000. It was a significant amount, but not difficult for someone whose foundation had an annual budget of $12 million. Still, I understood why it seemed extraordinary to others. What did you tell them? That I'd have to ask the donor. But Ms. Rivera, this story could inspire other people to give. It could help other children. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Westfield Mall. This is Sophia. Ms. Rivera. This is Janet from Mall Management. I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a situation here with Santa's area. What kind of situation? Well, there are about 50 kids here asking Santa when they're going to meet the toy lady. Their parents are saying you bought Christmas presents for the whole neighborhood. Is this true? I looked at Tony, who was grinning widely. It's complicated. The thing is, these kids are really excited and their parents are trying to figure out how to thank you. Some of them are crying, Ms. Rivera. They're saying it's the first time their kids will have a real Christmas. I felt my chest tighten. This was exactly why I'd started the foundation in the first place. Janet, can you give me an hour to think about this? Of course. But I should mention there's a news crew here. They heard about the story and they want to interview the anonymous donor. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a few minutes. Tony waited patiently, his Santa suit a reminder of the magic that Christmas could bring to children who rarely experienced it. Tony, what would you do? I'd go meet those kids, he said without hesitation. I've been Santa for 15 years, and I've never seen children as excited as they are about meeting you. But I've always kept the foundation's work private. Why? It was a good question. Why had I kept it private? Part of it was wanting to focus on the work rather than the recognition. Part of it was not wanting my family to treat me differently because of money. But mostly I realized it was fear. I guess I've been afraid that if people knew about the money, they'd assume that's all there is to me. Ms. Rivera, I've watched you work for months now. You don't just write checks. You know the name of every child we're helping. You've visited their schools, met with their teachers, talked to their parents. The money is just a tool. You're the one who cares. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. Just wanted to make sure you're okay with Christmas plans. We really do love you, even if you're not where we hoped you'd be in life. Not where they hoped I'd be in life. They only knew. Tony, I said, making a decision, let's go meet some kids. The drive to Westfield Mall took 20 minutes, during which Tony filled me in on some of the families we'd be helping. There's Maria Gonzalez, she's 8, asked for art supplies because she wants to be a painter. Her mom works 3 jobs and was crying when she heard we got Maria a full art set with an easel. What about the boy who wanted the bicycle? Tommy Williams. He's 10, been walking 2 miles to school every day because his family can't afford a bike. When his dad heard we got him the exact model he asked for, he called me crying. And the little girl who wanted the tablet for schoolwork? Aisha Johnson. She's brilliant. Teachers say she's reading at a high school level in 4th grade. Her family doesn't have a computer at home, so she's been doing homework at the library. The educational tablet we got her will change everything. By the time we arrived at the mall, I was fighting back tears. This was why the foundation existed. This was why I'd given up a high-paying tech career to focus on helping children. The mall was bustling with last-minute Christmas shoppers, but Santa's area was packed with families I recognized from our program. As soon as they saw Tony and me approaching, a cheer went up from the children. "It's the toy lady," shouted a little boy I recognized as Tommy Williams. "She's here. She's really here," called out Maria Gonzalez. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by dozens of children and their parents, all trying to thank me at once. "Ms. Rivera," said a woman I recognized as Tommy's mother, "I can't express what this means to our family. Tommy has been so excited about his bicycle that he's been practicing riding in the parking lot at our apartment complex." "You got Aisha exactly what she needed for school," said another parent. "She's been talking about all the learning programs she can use on her tablet." An older woman approached, tears in her eyes. "I'm Maria's grandmother. That little girl has been drawing pictures of you, calling you her fairy godmother. She says when she grows up she wants to help kids just like you do." I knelt down to Maria's level. Can I see some of your artwork? She shyly pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a drawing of a woman surrounded by children, with "Thank you, toy lady" written in careful crayon letters across the top. This is beautiful, Maria. Keep practicing your art, okay? I will. And someday I'm going to help kids too, just like you. As I moved through the crowd, meeting each child and their families, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the mall's heating system. These families didn't care about my net worth or my business success. They cared that someone had seen their children's needs and responded with generosity and love. "Ms. Rivera," said a news reporter who'd been waiting respectfully at the edge of the crowd, "could we have a few words?" I looked around at the families, at Tony in his Santa suit, at the children clutching pictures they'd drawn for me. Sure. The interview was brief but heartfelt. I talked about the importance of making sure every child feels valued during the holidays, about the joy of seeing specific wishes come true, about the community coming together to support its most vulnerable members. "And you funded this entire toy drive personally?" the reporter asked. "Through my foundation, yes. But the real work is done by volunteers like Tony here, and by the teachers and community workers who help us identify families in need." "Why do you do this?" "Because every child deserves to feel special. Every child deserves to know that someone cares about their dreams and wishes." After the news crew finished, I spent another hour with the families, taking pictures with the children and listening to their excited chatter about Christmas morning. As the crowd began to thin out, my phone rang. It was my sister, Gabriella. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay. I just saw you on the news. On the Channel 7 evening report. You were at the mall with a bunch of kids and they were calling you. Did they say you spent $500,000 on Christmas presents?" I looked around the mall at the families heading home with their hearts full of Christmas magic, at Tony still in his Santa suit talking to the last few children. "Yes." "Where did you get $500,000, Sophia?" "From my foundation." "What foundation?" "The Rivera Foundation. I started it 5 years ago." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Gabriella? Are you there? You have a foundation?" "Yes." "With $500,000? "With considerably more than that." "How much more?" "The foundation has assets of about $40 million. We distribute about $12 million per year to various children's charities and programs." Another long silence. "Sophia, where did you get $40 million? "I sold a tech startup I founded after college. Instead of spending the money, I started the foundation to help children who grow up the way we did." "The way we did?" "Poor Gabriella. We grew up poor. I remember what it felt like to want things for Christmas that Mom and Dad couldn't afford. I remember the years when we got one small gift each because that's all they could manage. But you never said. You never asked. Mom and Dad never asked. When I told you I worked for a nonprofit, you all assumed I was barely getting by. When I lived modestly, you assumed I couldn't afford better. When I didn't talk about money, you assumed I didn't have any. Oh my God. Sophia, we uninvited you from Christmas because we thought you were unsuccessful." "I know. We thought you'd embarrass us in front of Miguel's parents." "I know. We've been treating you like someone whose worth is determined by their apparent financial success? We're horrible people." "You're not horrible people. You made assumptions based on limited information. But yes, those assumptions led to hurtful behavior." I could hear Gabriella crying on the other end of the phone. "What can we do? How can we fix this?" "You can start by understanding that a person's value isn't determined by their wealth or status. You can start by treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances." "Can you ever forgive us?" "I can forgive you. But I need you to think about why you were so quick to exclude someone you thought was struggling instead of including and supporting them." 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. "Mija, your mother and I just watched the news." "Okay. We saw you with all those children. We saw how they looked at you, how grateful their families were. It was a good day. Sophia, we made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we're asking for it anyway." "Dad, why did you uninvite me from Christmas?" "Because we thought you weren't successful and we were ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" "Ashamed that our daughter was 31 and still struggling." "But I wasn't struggling, Dad. You just assumed I was because I don't live extravagantly." "We realize that now. We realize we don't know our own daughter at all. No, you don't. Will you come to Christmas dinner? Please. I thought about it for a moment. Only if you understand that my worth as a person has nothing to do with the foundation or the money. Only if you can love and respect me whether I'm wealthy or struggling. We understand. And Sophia. Yes. We're proud of you. Not because you're successful but because you're using your success to help children who need it. Christmas Day arrived with a fresh coating of snow that made the city look like a postcard. I spent the morning at the Foundation's distribution center, helping volunteers load the last of the gifts for families who couldn't make it to the mall event. Tony arrived around noon, this time dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his Santa suit. "How are you feeling about today?" he asked. "Nervous," I admitted. "This is the first Christmas in 4 years that I'm spending with my family." "Why nervous?" "Because now they know about the foundation and the money. I'm afraid they'll treat me differently." "Different how?" "Like I'm someone important instead of just their daughter who happens to care about helping kids." Tony laughed. "Sophia, you are someone important. But not because of the money. Because of this." He gestured around the distribution center, where volunteers were carefully loading bicycles, art supplies, tablets, and countless other gifts into delivery trucks. "Because of your willingness to see children's needs and respond with action. Because of your commitment to making sure no kid feels forgotten during the holidays." At 3 p.m. I arrived at my parents' house for Christmas dinner. The familiar smell of my mother's cooking greeted me at the door, along with hugs that felt more genuine than they had in years. "Sophia," my mother said, holding me tightly, "I'm so sorry about the text. I'm so sorry we almost missed celebrating Christmas with our daughter." "I'm here now, Mom." The afternoon was different from previous family gatherings. Instead of polite small talk, we had real conversations. My family asked thoughtful questions about the foundation, about the children we helped, about my vision for expanding our programs. "Tell us about the tech company you sold," my father asked over dinner. "It was an app that helped small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. I saw a problem that needed solving, built a solution, and got lucky when a larger company wanted to acquire us." "How old were you?" 26. "And you used all the money to start the foundation?" "Most of it. I kept enough to live comfortably, but I didn't need $40 million for personal expenses. I needed it to make a difference." Gabriella leaned forward. "What made you want to help children specifically? Do you remember Christmas when I was 12 and you were 10? "Which one?" "The one where Mom and Dad could only afford to give us each one gift, and you gave me half of yours because you could see I was disappointed?" Gabriella's eyes filled with tears. "I remember. That's when I decided that if I ever had the means, I'd make sure other kids didn't have to choose between their own happiness and their siblings." "And now you're doing that for thousands of children," my mother said proudly. "We're doing that," I corrected. "The foundation is just the funding. The real work is done by teachers, social workers, volunteers, and families who care about their communities." As the evening wound down, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The sense that my family truly knew and accepted me for who I was. "Sophia," my father said as I prepared to leave, "I want you to know that we're proud of you. Not because you're wealthy but because you're generous. Not because you're successful but because you're kind." "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me." The drive home took me past several of the neighborhoods where our foundation worked. Many of the houses had Christmas lights twinkling in their windows, and I knew that behind those windows were children playing with toys that had made their Christmas wishes come true. My phone buzzed with a text from Tony. "The Johnson family sent this photo." It was a picture of Aisha working on her new tablet, completely absorbed in an educational program. Another text arrived from Maria's grandmother. "Maria wanted you to see her Christmas painting." The attached photo showed a beautiful watercolor of a Christmas tree, painted with the art supplies we'd provided. As I parked in front of my modest apartment building, I reflected on the past week. My family had learned valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and the difference between success and the performance of success. But more importantly, thousands of children had learned that there are people in the world who care about their dreams and wishes. The next morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my mother. "Sophia, your father and I have been talking and we want to volunteer with the foundation. We want to help however we can." "That would be wonderful, Mom. And Gabriella wants to use her interior design skills to help create better spaces at the community centers you work with." "I'd love to discuss that with her." There's one more thing, my mother said. We want to host a fundraiser for the foundation. We want our friends and neighbors to know about the amazing work you're doing. You don't have to do that. We want to. We want to be part of something meaningful. 6 months later, the Rivera Foundation had grown to include my entire family as volunteers and advocates. My parents organized monthly fundraising events. Gabriella designed beautiful, functional spaces for our partner organizations. And even my brother-in-law Miguel used his accounting skills to help us maximize our impact. The foundation's annual report that year showed that we'd helped over 10,000 children across the state, funded educational programs in 50 schools, and provided emergency assistance to hundreds of families. But the number I was most proud of was smaller. One family that had learned to see past assumptions and recognize that the most successful people are often the ones who use their success to lift others up. Sometimes the best Christmas gift isn't something you receive. It's the opportunity to show people who you really are and watch them rise to meet you there. And sometimes it takes a Santa from the mall to remind a family that the person they thought was unsuccessful was actually making Christmas magic happen for thousands of children. A year later, Tony still plays Santa at Westfield Mall. But now, when children ask about the toy lady, he tells them about the Rivera Foundation and how they can help other kids when they grow up. Because the best Christmas magic isn't what happens once a year. It's what happens when people decide to care about each other every single day.